There's a moment in every person's life when reality fractures. Not the reality you've been taught to see, not the carefully constructed narrative of cause and effect, success and failure, good and evil. No, this is something far more disturbing, far more profound. It's the moment when the veil tears, when the comfortable illusions that have held your world together suddenly dissolve, and you're left staring into an abyss that has always been there, waiting patiently beneath the surface of your consciousness. Ibn Arabi, the 12th century Andalusian mystic and philosopher, called this moment the opening. But don't mistake this for some gentle spiritual awakening, some peaceful enlightenment that brings comfort and clarity. What Ibn Arabi described was something far more violent, far more shattering. It was a psychological blow so profound that it fundamentally restructures how you perceive existence itself. And once you've been struck by it, there is no going back to the person you were before. Most people live their entire lives without ever experiencing this blow. They move through the world in a kind of waking dream, accepting without question the boundaries of what is real, what is possible, what is true. They build their identities on foundations of sand, constructing elaborate stories about who they are, what they want, what their life means. And these stories feel solid, they feel real, until they don't. The truth that Ibn Arabi spent his life exploring is one that most psychological and philosophical systems dare not touch: the fundamental unreality of the self you think you are. Not in some abstract theoretical sense, but in a visceral, experiential way that changes everything. He understood that human consciousness operates within layers of illusion so deep, so pervasive, that most people never suspect they're there. We mistake the map for the territory, the shadow for the substance, the dream for the dreamer. Consider for a moment the nature of your own awareness right now. You believe you are reading these words. You believe you are a singular, unified consciousness experiencing this moment. You believe that your thoughts, your memories, your desires are yours, that they belong to something called you. But what if that entire framework is the illusion? What if the very sense of being a separate self, distinct from the world around you, is the primary delusion from which all other suffering and confusion flows? This isn't philosophy for the sake of philosophy. This is about the actual structure of your experience, right now, in this moment. Ibn Arabi discovered through his own psychological and spiritual investigations that what we call consciousness is not what we think it is. The I that seems to be at the center of your experience, the one making decisions, having thoughts, experiencing emotions, this is not a real entity. It's a construct, a story, a persistent illusion maintained by intricate psychological mechanisms that have evolved to help you survive, but not to help you see the truth. The psychological blow that Ibn Arabi describes comes when this illusion is suddenly penetrated. Not through intellectual understanding. You can read about it, think about it, discuss it philosophically, and remain completely untouched by its reality. The blow comes through direct experience, through a moment when the constructed self temporarily collapses, and you see with devastating clarity that you are not who you thought you were. You are not what you thought you were. And this is where it becomes terrifying, because if you are not the person you've always believed yourself to be, then what are you? If your memories, your personality, your entire life story are not the foundation of your identity, then what is left? This is the abyss that opens up when the veil tears. This is why most people are not prepared to see what Ibn Arabi saw. Human beings have an extraordinary capacity for self-deception. We construct elaborate defense mechanisms to protect ourselves from truths that threaten our psychological stability. We build walls of belief, habit, and routine that keep us safely contained within our familiar sense of self. We surround ourselves with people who reflect back to us the image we want to see. We consume media, pursue goals, engage in relationships, all in service of maintaining the story of who we are. But beneath all of this activity, beneath all of these carefully maintained structures, there is a fundamental anxiety, a whisper of knowing that something isn't quite right, a sense that the life you're living, the person you're being, is somehow not the whole truth. Most people spend their entire lives running from this whisper, drowning it out with noise, distraction, achievement, pleasure, pain. anything to avoid sitting still long enough to hear what it's trying to tell them. Ibn Arabi didn't run. He turned toward the whisper. He dove into the uncertainty, into the not knowing, into the terrifying possibility that everything he believed about himself and reality might be wrong. And what he discovered there was both more beautiful and more disturbing than anything the ordinary mind can conceive. He discovered that the universe is not a collection of separate objects and beings, but a single, unified reality, experiencing itself through infinite perspectives. He discovered that what we call God, reality, consciousness, existence, these are not separate things, but different names for the same fundamental truth. And most shocking of all, he discovered that you, the person reading these words right now, are not a small separate entity looking out at a vast universe. You are that universe, temporarily convinced that you are something small and separate. This sounds abstract. It sounds like mystical poetry, beautiful perhaps, but not particularly relevant to the actual experience of being alive. But this is where the psychological blow comes in. Because Ibn Arabi wasn't speaking in metaphors, he was describing the actual structure of consciousness, the actual nature of reality, as directly experienced when the veils of illusion are stripped away. Imagine for a moment that your sense of being a separate self is like a knot in a piece of rope. The knot appears to be a distinct thing, different from the rest of the rope. It has a particular shape, a particular location. You could point to it and say, "There's the knot." But look closer. Where does the knot actually begin? Where does it end? At what exact point does the rope stop being rope and become knot? The truth is, there is no knot. There is only rope, temporarily configured in a way that creates the appearance of a distinct entity. But that entity has no independent existence. It's an appearance, a pattern, not a thing. Your sense of self is like that knot. It appears real, it feels real. You can point to it and say, "This is me." But when you look closely enough, when you examine the actual nature of your experience with ruthless honesty, you begin to see that there is no independently existing self. There are thoughts, but no thinker. There are experiences, but no experiencer. There is awareness, but no one who is aware. This is the psychological blow. And it's devastating because your entire life, your entire identity, your entire sense of meaning and purpose has been built on the assumption that you are a real, independently existing entity. Every decision you've made, every goal you've pursued, every relationship you've formed has been predicated on this fundamental belief. And suddenly, in a moment of shattering clarity, you see that it was all based on an illusion. But here's where it becomes even more complex, even more disturbing. The realization that there is no separate self doesn't make the experience of being a self go away. After the blow, after the moment of seeing, the knot reforms. The sense of I returns. You still have to live your life, make decisions, relate to others, but now you know. You know that the you who is doing all of this isn't real in the way you thought it was. You're living a life you know is a dream, playing a character you know is fictional, pursuing goals you know are ultimately meaningless, and yet you have to keep doing it anyway. This is what Ibn Arabi meant by the unity of existence. It's not a comforting spiritual belief. It's a psychological fact that once seen cannot be unseen. It's the recognition that there is only one reality, one consciousness, one existence, experiencing itself through the illusion of multiplicity. You are not separate from the universe. You are the universe temporarily pretending to be separate, temporarily lost in the dream of individuality. And the most disturbing part, the universe isn't pretending by accident. This isn't a mistake that needs to be corrected. The illusion of separation, the experience of being an individual self, is not something to escape from. It's the entire point. Existence has deliberately fragmented itself into infinite perspectives, infinite experiences, infinite lives, so that it can know itself, so that it can experience itself. You are existence, having forgotten that you are existence, so that you can experience the drama, the beauty, the terror, the love, the pain of being something limited, something finite, something that can be born and die. This is why most people are not prepared to see what Ibn Arabi saw. Because once you see it, you have to live with the knowledge that your life is both utterly meaningful and completely meaningless at the same time. It's meaningful because you are the universe experiencing itself, and every moment, every experience, every emotion is the universe knowing itself. But it's meaningless because there is no separate you to whom any of this matters. There is no personal story that has any ultimate significance. There is no individual achievement that means anything in the grand scheme of existence. The psychological structures we build to give our lives meaning, our careers, our relationships, our beliefs, our goals, all of these are revealed as elaborate games we play to avoid confronting this fundamental truth. We create problems so we can solve them. We create desires so we can pursue them. We create identities so we can defend them. All of it is a magnificent distraction from the simple, terrifying fact that there is nowhere to go, nothing to achieve, no one to become, because you are already the totality of existence, playing the game of being something less. But don't mistake this for nihilism. This isn't a philosophy of meaninglessness and despair. Ibn Arabi discovered something far more paradoxical, far more beautiful. He discovered that when you fully accept the unreality of the separate self, when you stop resisting the truth of your fundamental nature, something extraordinary happens. The burden of being someone, of maintaining an identity, of defending a self, simply drops away. And what's left is a kind of freedom that the ordinary mind cannot conceive. This freedom is not the freedom to do whatever you want. It's not the freedom of having no constraints or responsibilities. It's something far more subtle, far more profound. It's the freedom that comes from recognizing that you are not separate from life, but are life itself. It's the freedom that comes from realizing that there is no you that can fail or succeed, no you that can be rejected or accepted, no you that can be loved or unloved, because the you you've been defending doesn't actually exist. When this truth is fully embodied, not just intellectually understood but lived, it transforms everything. Relationships become simpler because there is no self to defend, no image to maintain. Decisions become easier because there is no separate entity trying to control outcomes for its own benefit. Fear diminishes because there is no separate self that can be threatened. Anxiety loosens its grip because there is no future self that needs to be protected or perfected. But getting to this point requires passing through the fire. It requires experiencing the psychological blow, the shattering of the familiar self, and not turning away. Most people, when they glimpse this truth, immediately retreat. The mind scrambles to rebuild the walls, to reconstruct the familiar sense of me, to return to the comfortable illusion of separation, because the alternative is too terrifying. The alternative is free fall. The alternative is not knowing who you are, what you are, why you exist. Ibn Arabi spent his life exploring this territory. He developed intricate philosophical systems to map the journey from illusion to reality, from separation to unity, from the false self to the true nature of existence. But all of his words, all of his teachings, all of his elaborate metaphysical constructions point to something that cannot be taught or transmitted through language. They point to a direct experience that each person must have for themselves, in their own way, in their own time. The question is, are you ready for the blow? Are you prepared to have your entire sense of reality shattered? Are you willing to see what lies beneath the surface of your carefully constructed identity? Most people, if they're honest with themselves, are not. And there's no judgment in that. The psychological structures we've built are there for a reason. They serve a function. They keep us stable, functioning, able to navigate the complexities of human life. But for some people, there comes a point when those structures become a prison, when the safety they provide becomes suffocating, when the comfort of the known becomes more painful than the terror of the unknown. And in those moments, the possibility opens up for something else, for the veil to tear, for the blow to land, for reality to reveal itself in its naked, unfiltered truth. This is what Ibn Arabi understood about the human journey. It's not about becoming better, more spiritual, more enlightened. It's about seeing through the illusion of being someone who needs to become anything. It's about recognizing that the search for wholeness, for completion, for perfection is itself the obstacle. Because you are already whole, you are already complete, you are already perfect, but not as the person you think you are, as something infinitely larger, infinitely more mysterious. The separate self that you've spent your entire life believing in, defending, developing. This is like a wave believing it's separate from the ocean. The wave has a distinct form. It has a beginning and an end. It rises and falls. It can be large or small, powerful or weak. It can crash into other waves, merge with other waves, be destroyed by the shore. And from the perspective of the wave, all of this seems very real, very important, very meaningful. But step back. Look at the larger picture. What is a wave, really? It's a temporary pattern in water. It's the ocean moving. The wave is not separate from the ocean. It is the ocean temporarily taking on a particular form. And when the wave dies, when it crashes into the shore and disappears, what has actually been lost? Nothing. The water remains. The ocean remains. Only the temporary pattern, the temporary form, has dissolved back into its source. You are like that wave. Your life, your identity, your story, these are temporary patterns in consciousness, in existence, in reality. They are not separate from the totality. They are the totality temporarily taking on a particular form. And when this form dissolves, when this life ends, what will actually be lost? Not consciousness, not awareness, not existence. Only the temporary pattern, the temporary form, the temporary illusion of being someone separate. But here's the crucial point that Ibn Arabi emphasized again and again. You don't have to wait until death to realize this. You don't have to wait for the form to dissolve to recognize your true nature. The realization can happen right now, in this very moment. It can happen through a sudden psychological blow, a moment of grace, an unexpected opening in the fabric of your ordinary consciousness. And when it does, everything changes and nothing changes. Everything changes because you see through the illusion. You recognize the fundamental unreality of the separate self. You understand that you are not a small, limited entity struggling to survive in a vast, indifferent universe. You are the universe itself, experiencing limitation, experiencing struggle, experiencing survival. Nothing changes because you still have to live your life. You still have to pay your bills, maintain your relationships, deal with your emotions, navigate your challenges. The form continues. The wave keeps waving, but now you know what you are. Now you remember your true nature. This is the paradox at the heart of Ibn Arabi's teaching. The spiritual journey is not about going anywhere or becoming anything. It's about recognizing what you already are, what you have always been, what you cannot not be. It's about waking up from the dream of separation while still living within the dream. It's about being the ocean that has momentarily forgotten it's the ocean and then suddenly remembering while continuing to play at being a wave. The psychological implications of this realization are profound. When you truly understand that there is no separate self, the entire structure of your psychology transforms. Guilt loses its foundation because there is no separate you that has done anything wrong. Pride loses its power because there is no separate you that has achieved anything. Shame dissolves because there is no separate you that can be fundamentally flawed or inadequate. Fear diminishes because there is no separate you that can ultimately be threatened. But this doesn't mean you become emotionless or indifferent. This doesn't mean you stop caring about your life or the lives of others. In fact, the opposite happens. When the illusion of separation dissolves, what remains is a profound sense of connection.